flipping the script.
You and
Yeah.
I have seen each other face to face. I think we got on the
No, I
phone
don't think so.
when
Yeah.
I was doing the book, but it's good to finally see you and connect.
Yeah, likewise. Oh
Um,
man, and thanks for including me in this thing, dude. It's been fun.
I'm really glad you're able to be a part of it. I'm glad you've been able to be a part of the whole project for the last couple of years. But um, these things are fun. It's cool to see the Instagram community kind of like come together on it. It's like a small core group, but um, every once in a while you get kind of like some heated battle type stuff. But for the most part, everybody kind of keeps it competition used to build themselves up, which is cool.
That's awesome. No,
Yeah,
and I was impressed with the variety of stuff. Like I really liked all those Philly hands.
yeah,
Like dude, I'm a fan of the Philly stuff, but dude, it's just so unlegible at times, you know? And it's like, dude, there's dudes that could do it great. There was one kid that submitted that was awesome. Like I can't remember what his name was, but
yeah. The first guy, Magical Doobie Hopper, he's
yeah.
submitted a bunch over a couple of ones, but this one he hit it like fast and furious. I think he was like the first 4 or 6, and they were all killers.
Yeah, I did it was hard to really make a selection, man, because
Yeah,
it's like you go through like, okay, what do I like aesthetically versus what do I think is like dude, the single line that one kid did. I sat there in my head going, dude, how is he gonna do an R to an I to an M to an I with those little loops that he did? And I was like, dude, that dude's a genius, like the way he did those, you know?
yeah,
It was really cool.
yeah. It's funny because all the animations that are on the Instagram, I basically that's how I do them. I just put them in Photoshop. People think it's some sort of like, oh, what's the app use? It's just old school frame by frame animation. I go through, I put them in Photoshop, and then I do them backwards. I like delete them, and then I run the animation forward. So it's like I'm literally deconstructing the tag, and I'll often finish one of those animations, and especially whenever one of the freaking Philly guys wins one of these contests, and I have to figure out the flow on those Philly ones. It takes me like 10 times longer than any other tag.
Yeah. Dude, I remember the first time I went to Philly in like God, I think it was like 92 maybe. And dude, I was driving around going, what the fuck? You know, having been just like a Miami guy, like
Yeah,
dude, seeing their style and the big flares and you know how tall their tags were versus, you know, we were catching tags that were like, you know, this big, and these dudes are doing stuff that's 7 feet tall and all flared out. And I was like, dude, it completely threw me for a loop. And I remember seeing Den and NM were like up
yeah,
everywhere. And I was just that like but I was like, dude, I love the fact that it was a regional thing. You know what I mean? Like that,
yeah,
dude, that's one of the only hand styles that's like, dude, it's so dude, that's Philly. Like if you're trying to fake that somewhere else, people are gonna call you on and be like, dude, you're just trying to do a Philly style, you know?
yeah,
Which is
yeah,
rad, you
yeah.
know?
It's funny you should say that because I was talking about this with someone the other day. 92, you were probably using fat caps.
Sorry about that. Bruno, stop. Sorry.
I forget when you were able to buy fat caps like online and stuff, but 92, when you're talking about those flares are like pretty ubiquitous around the world now.
Right.
But I think Philly was the first time that I saw them too because people were reaching so high with them.
Yep.
And
Yeah.
and now it's
Now
kind
it's
of
all
just
this like
everywhere.
wrist stuff that
Yeah,
everybody's doing, and I'm like, dude, yeah, that looks cool. This, you know, small, but these dudes were doing gigantic tags. Like I remember, I went bombing with Escher and a guy named Rogue that was from Pittsburgh, and I mean, Rogue had that like super Philly hand style as well.
uh-huh.
And dude, I remember like I'm catching like just normal, you know, like probably like a waist to above my head size tags. And this dude was doing these like gigantic top to bottom tags. And I was like, I don't get it. Hold on. I'm letting my dogs out while we're doing this.
Okay.
Oh, sorry. They think they're the guardians of the neighborhood.
So tell me about I was looking at your page in the book. Actually, let's start with this. I for months or years after the thing came out, I had that nervous feeling of like, man, I hope I did everybody right. I hope everybody liked the book and felt good about it. And now because it's 10 years into the past, I can face people and be like, hey, give me a review. What'd you think of it? Like Where did you think it was really great? Where do you think that I overlooked some areas? Where did you think like
No,
was short shrifted? Like was Miami? What did you think of the Miami chapter? I guess start there.
and I thought it was great. I honestly did. That's the one book that, like, I loved every page but mine, not because of you, but because of me. Because I
Yeah.
remember being in a, like, I think you caught me right towards the end of the thing, and I remember doing the tags with just like a Sharpie, and then I looked in the book and everybody's using these nice chisel tips and really like, dude, killing it the way they did their tags, and I was like, oh my god, my page looks terrible,
Oh, I think
Um,
everybody feels that about their own. I love your page.
oh, you might be the only one because, dude, I that was a rough one. But no, I thought the book was rad, and I thought the concept was rad. Like and I love the way you dove into each city and just kind of like, I don't know, man. For me, it really worked. As a whole, like you look at like subway art or well more spray can art where it was like cities and regions and all this, and this to me this was the first thing that was kind of done that way, but all hand styles, which is rad.
Mhm.
Dash made me feel like an idiot when I read his, because he's like such a like, he's a professor on this stuff, and he's like, oh well, this E came from this, that, and the other, and blah blah blah. And I read it and I'm like, dude, that all makes sense. And mine is like, I just like having fun. You know what I mean? Like,
You had
so
some good insights in yours, though. I was reading through your stuff today. I mean, like, and I wanted to ask because you recognize like you had some influence from the West Coast from King, and
yeah,
that's what I wanted to ask you about next was because you and your guy Raven, you guys were very much at the forefront of like trading and zines and like kind of the pre-internet, you know, style sharing in a lot of ways.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's funny. So I had the luxury this year of or well, I guess it's been 2 years now that I joined ATT, the crew from the Midwest, with East and Scribe and all these guys and Quays. And I've never met him in person yet, but dude, we were pen pals for years. Like,
Oh
dude, we
wow.
would trade packages of flicks constantly, like that was really cool. And with the King 157 situation was, I went out to San Francisco to see a friend of mine. He was a guy that used to be in our crew called Minor, and he was also a rapper. And I went out there to hang out with him, and his studio, like his music studio, was in a guy named Claude Ferguson used to have these studios, and I can't remember what they were called, but I remember the dude's name. And Aladdin from the West Coast, from San Jose, had a studio there, and he was having a show that weekend. So I met Aladdin, and he was like, "Oh, another writer or whatever." And he was like, "Oh, let's paint." So I ended up painting with Dare from the West Coast, Sphinx. Um, it was Dare, Sphinx, Kim 157, Aladdin, and I think, God, I can't remember if Picasso showed up or not. But then
Okay.
we ended up doing like some bridge, like under a bridge spot, and then me and King just became really good friends. And well, I'd say Dare, like I kept in touch with Dare and King the most, and then Aladdin started tattooing and all that, and then we reconnected years later. But yeah, King and I just, it was constant, like just packages going back and forth, because I felt we were
Mhm.
doing so much stuff on the East Coast, and those guys were so especially King, such an admirer of like all the New York stuff,
Yeah.
that he really appreciated. I would just get doubles of pics of all my
Right.
flicks and send them stuff. So, but yeah, I traded
How
with a lot of people for years.
yeah, like how deep into it, like about what age were you when you started like really getting into the multi-city thing? Like were you doing it for a couple of years locally?
No, it's funny because I I had the advantage of being like just upwardly mobile, in that I had a car compared to a lot of the guys in
Okay.
Miami, and I went off to college. Most of these guys stayed in Miami, and I ended up going to Savannah. And I was dating a girl from New York, and it was a 12-hour drive. And I'm big into the hardcore scene, and
Hmm.
so I would go see hardcore shows. I was like, oh, Gorilla Biscuits is playing, and drive to New
Hmm.
York. Oh, Sick of It All is playing.
From
So
Savannah?
yeah. So
Dang.
it was a 12-hour drive, but dude, it wasn't bad. Like we would we would do it constantly.
When you're young
Um,
enough. Yeah.
yeah, when you're 18, dude, it's like, oh, and gas is under $1 a gallon.
Right. Yeah.
And
You're straight edge probably, or
yeah.
yeah.
So it made it dude, like my desire to like kind of break out of just being a Miami guy was like, I started painting Savannah and started painting New York a lot. And then on the way, I was like, oh, there's all these places that you could paint on the way to New York, So I started painting in Richmond and DC and Philly and anywhere that I can make some sort of connection with somebody. And back then it was rad because it was word of mouth. It was like yeah, hey, I'm going to such and such city, and somebody'd be like, oh, I know a guy there. Here's his number, and you'd randomly call some dude, be like, hey, you want to paint?
Right.
So it was kind of cool. Yeah, I started making all those connections. Honestly, I made most of the connections like personally, like meeting the people first, and then continuing our relationship and trading pics. But I think Quays was one of the only ones that I had never met in person. He had that Volume 1 magazine, and back in the day, and I think since I was affiliated with 12 Ounce and he was Volume 1, we traded pics one day, and that's where that came in. Hold on, I'm gonna let my dogs back in. Oh.
Okay.
Come on, puppies. Sorry about that.
Okay.
But yeah,
So Quays was based out of where? He was Midwest, or
he was not Kansas City. He was Chicago, but more like Gary, Indiana, like area.
Okay.
Like right over the border, I guess.
And what was that crew that you said? That was
ATT.
ATT. Okay.
Yeah, so there's some heavy hitters in that crew. Like it's funny, it's the first time that I've joined a crew where for one, it's the first crew that I've ever been in that I wasn't part of from like inception.
Founding.
You know what I mean? Like that I actually joined instead of like helped start or helped form. And it's weird because dude, the Midwest has got this like thriving, awesome graffiti scene.
Yeah.
That a lot of people don't know about, and people in Miami, really honestly, a lot of them are just like Miami, and they don't think that there's anything outside of Miami. They're very
same with all the big cities, right? Like New York, LA, we're all kind of like that.
Yeah, but I think for the most part, a lot of cities, like people have a kind of a general awareness of what's going on around the country. But Miami dudes, for some reason, don't really, everybody comes to them now with Basil, so it's like they'll meet dudes that way, which I think has been great for Miami. It's I think it's opened a lot of dudes' eyes that like there's a lot of guys that did 4 pieces in 1988 and still think like, yo, I'm a king. And then they see these dudes coming from everywhere that are just amazing. They're like, oh, wait, maybe I'm not so much of a king,
Yeah, yeah.
I might be more of a pawn.
I mean, the technicality that's changed. What year did you start writing? Mid 80s or?
Mid 80s. I started painting on walls in 87.
Okay.
Like out of my neighborhood. I started painting in 85 in my neighborhood, but it's funny, dude. Like my first piece was on the street, like literally on the street, which is ridiculous now when I think about it. But I was painting like with spray paint on walls in 85, but nobody outside of like a 2-block radius would have ever known I existed. Like it's not like I made any kind of impact. And everything that I was painting was like, there was these like a security shed that was abandoned that we painted on the inside of. There was like a subdivision that didn't get finished that had a bunch of just like cinder block walls that we painted. But it wasn't, I wasn't making any kind of like real like splash. I'd say bombing like outside of my neighborhood, probably 86, but just tags, and then actual pieces everywhere, 87, and that was that was a big year for me. That was when I realized like, oh wow, you can, like, for one, my eyes were open to a whole lot of different, you leave your neighborhood and you're like, oh wow, dude, like you're not the best dude because you're the best guy in the cafeteria anymore. Like there's dudes like all over the place that are alpha males. So
right,
it was cool though. But then I started traveling in 1990 when I graduated high school, and that was it. Like from that point, I did a couple of months on the West Coast. I did, the East Coast up and down constantly, and then I would go back and forth to the West Coast. So I had the luxury, not luxury, but the But I had the
experience.
great opportunity of
Yeah.
painting places like Psycho City and the Belmont tunnels and all this stuff
Hmm.
that were like iconic West Coast spots that I don't know are around anymore. Before they disappeared. So that's kind of cool,
Hmm. Yeah. When you first got into writing in like the mid '80s, you mentioned the punk rock thing. I think what kids so I've got three teenagers, and my kids are seeped in my geekiness with all things subculture. But like I think a lot of kids who are getting into this now, they kind of think of these different subcultures as kind of coexisting. But in the early to mid '80s, you mentioned punk rock, but like were you involved in kind of like, because the b-boy scene was popping off in Miami pretty big at that time too, and like hip hop and punk rock were kind of seen in that Glenn Friedman way, like kind of seen as these rebellious things that were simpatico, if not the same culture, very very similar. You would go in and out of them in a lot of ways, right?
Right.
Yeah.
It was funny because Miami, it did have a big like it was a very like they were by the late '80s. It was a lot of like that freestyle music, all that like Trinier and all. People
Uh-huh.
were going to little dance clubs. But a little earlier than that, there was like the Beat Club and a couple of spots that I think it was called was it Video Powerhouse maybe,
Okay.
and those were like the hip hop spots. But dude, if you were like a little kid, it was really really scary. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
yeah,
Like I
yeah.
saw Mantronics at the Beat Club, and dude, I remember like I was like I love Mantronics, but it was terrifying.
Hmm.
Like
Hmm.
really, you're in there like just like but as a younger brother, I had the luxury of like having a 3 year old older brother that's a big, big, beefy dude that was a brawler, and he my brother got into things first, and I just like being a little brother, you're like, oh, my brother's the coolest, and so he got into all the like break dancing and all that kind of stuff, and I had zero rhythm. I had just lost my leg, so breaking was kind of like prosthetics were terrible back then. So,
How
but
old
I
were
could
you
draw
when you lost your leg?
11.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I lost it. I got attacked by pit bulls when I was 11 years old, riding a bicycle
Wow.
by 3 pits. So, that was 83. And that was like when the breaking was like at its best. And I remember my cousins were really good breakers. My brother could break. I could draw, And
Hmm.
so when we would show up to places, there was always the cardboard. So I'd be, having a Magnum 44 Magnum little marker
Hmm.
and drawing up the cardboards, but I had no rhythm to speak of. So,
Yeah.
but then my brother got into like hardcore. Well, he got into punk rock for like a split second. I mean, like now he's like, oh, that's screamy bullshit. But at the time, like he took me to my first show, and it was in '85. It was Black Flag was playing on Halloween
Oh
night,
wow.
and I went, and I was, dude, just all these like big skinhead kids, and dude, it was like terrifying. And then he went off to my brother did a program called High School in Israel, so he left, and his best friend dove like headfirst into the punk rock thing, and I was like, hey Robert, take me to a show, So I started going
Hmm.
to shows with him, and got to see a bunch of amazing bands. But it was funny because I had a mohawk. I was like super like hardcore kid. I had a mohawk in the punk rock days, and then when like New York hardcore kind of became the big thing, like probably like '88 ish,
Hmm.
'89. Then it was like the shaved head and champion hoodies and
Hmm.
um, Adidas Phantoms, and so it's funny because our crew of free agents was all punk rock kids, which
Hmm.
was we were the only crew in my like every other crew in Miami was like very like into gangs, into very like not even like it wasn't so much b-boy stuff, it was just like straight thug shit,
Right. Right.
and we were the only crew. Like FA was like known like, oh, those are those punk rock kids, because we all skateboarded, we were all into going to shows, and we recruited dudes like Rage was the singer of Beyond Reason, like one of the local punk rock bands.
Hmm.
And when we figured out that he was a writer, we were like, come on, like yeah, and dude, that dude did damage. Like Rage, honestly, like
Yeah.
in the late '80s, early '90s, was like bombing so much and just like really a menace to homeowners associations everywhere.
So the crews that were around kind of before, I guess, Dash kind of breaks down in the book the VO5, and actually he does a pretty good job of like really kind of talking through the styles and like where things come
Hmm.
from. It's amazing to me when someone has the ability to see those things. And in retrospect, it's kind of easy to see them, or easier to see them. Some of us still can't see them in general. I'm fascinated by other people's ability to do it, which is why I do this project. But I'm not
Right.
able to necessarily do that. I'm kind of like looking for the clues and trying to figure that out with stuff. But so you had like VO5. Who were the other like bigger crews, kind of like a generation
The
before
big
you guys?
crews, prior to ATA was a huge crew
Right.
in Miami, but it was kind of like pre like they were kind of at the end of their run when I got into it. And but I'd say there was a crew called Seven Up,
Yep.
AIM, FA, um, WBB, VO5,
All the King's Men,
DFC.
was that about the same
What's that?
time? ATKM, All the King's Men, was that?
Yeah, ATKM was around at that, and they were and it's funny because I got put down with that too. But they were there's a crew called Can Crew in Miami, and dude, those dudes bombed like nobody. Like to me, they were the first like super all city bomber dudes. But they also had a very dude, like we fought all the time. You know what I mean? Like they had a like this thing of it was almost like the Cap versus like if you're watching Star Wars, like like your team Cap where you're like,
Right.
hey, go for
Blood Wars
anybody,
thing.
whatever.
Yeah.
Dude, yeah. And these guys had very much that mentality. Like, dude, they dissed every nice piece. And just for no reason other than like, hey, we can. You know what I mean? And that was their big like it was CAN, Crimes at Night was the crew, but they would always write catch us if you can, like CAN.
Okay.
Um and um and as a result, like dude, they were knuckleheads. I'm friends with all of them now, but they were knuckleheads at the time, and those guys were like they bombed a lot,
Yeah.
But the
Yeah.
crews that were actually like doing pieces and all that, I'd say were AIM, FA, RA, WBB, Seven Up, VO5, DFC. Dude, there was other crews like TIA that was around. There was what were those kids create intent and all that MIE and ammo, like there was these little smaller crews that
Hmm.
did do little pieces and did do but didn't blow up like on the scale that the rest of them did, that they
So
weren't like powerhouses.
so what I wanted to ask you is, you know, um, the crew association and kind of just like who you're rolling with and the influence that comes from one another. You mentioned the punk rock vibe that you guys had in comparison. And Dash in the book he talks about VO5, and he actually pulls like from it some influence of New Yorkers who kind of went back and forth. Do you think that punk rock um,
I'm gonna mute.
mentality, do you think that punk rock mentality or aesthetic influenced any of your style, that your style? So like you and Rage both have like, you have kind of like the small to big flow that's kind of like a pretty typical late 80s type of flow, and then Rage had that in some of his earlier tags, and then he moved to like this logo looking thing. um I don't know, I'm just curious about kind of like the influences that we have in our small communities, but then in the larger thing of like the shared thing and the differences between kind of like a hip hop versus a punk rock thing. Like, are we looking at a lot of band logos? Is that the influence? Like,
Yeah,
is there anything that makes it unique to you?
it's funny because I think that I do think that like I think the FA logo, the way we used to do it was like the middle bar of the F was the middle bar of the A, and it was very reminiscent. Like it always
Yeah,
reminded me
like
of like the 7 Seconds logo for some
yeah,
reason.
yeah, exactly.
Um,
Yeah,
so I think that we definitely went more of a
or
logoistic kind
or like
of
negative
route.
approach, or like those. Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah.
Like just more of an icon than just a bunch of letters next to each other, And
Mhm.
even I think it influenced us more in our pieces. Everybody back then was always looking for reference material, And so if you look like dude, I did a lot of characters that were back then that were skateboard graphics, that
Mhm.
were band graphics, like album cover art stuff. we were definitely, we always tended to kind of, even fill-ins like Gator Rogowski looking stuff, and you
Mhm.
know, like we were more into that like look, as opposed to, you know, whereas everybody's doing like a little b-boy that's like, you know, that my characters had mohawks and my, you know,
Mhm.
that kind of thing. But I don't know if specifically from my hand style, I think our hand styles were pretty common, or pretty, you know what I mean, like pretty,
Mhm.
I don't think that there was anything that really jumped out as like you would go, oh, that was a hardcore kid, other than you know, a lot of times like I tended to do a lot of the, you know, how you do like the New York hardcore, like with the X.
Mhm.
You know, there was times that we would do stuff like that next to our tags that would, people wouldn't get, you know,
Right.
they'd be like, you know, like I did a lot of straight edge stuff. Like I still to this day, like all my characters have X's on their hands, and a lot of people are like, "What is that about?" I'm like, "Ah, straight edge, you know, still
Right.
nailed to the X, you know."
Yeah. Awesome. Um, what else I want to ask you about? I was like, so you left Miami at 19, went to college. Did you go to where'd you go to school in Savannah?
SCAD,
Okay.
Savannah College of Art and Design.
Right.
Went there with
Did you
Jose Parla, Ease,
oh okay.
and
There
oh,
you go.
you
There you
froze
go.
for a second.
All right. Ease was at Scat around the same time as you?
Yeah, we went at the same exact time, and that was kind of the, that's basically where Inkheads, the whole Inkheads thing,
Okay.
really, even though Edic was kind of the one that started it, from what I understand, like,
Okay.
or the one that came up with the concept. When Ease went to Savannah, he was kind of done with Graph. Like he still loved Graph. He was still, but he was like, "Oh, I'm here for college. You know, I can't mess." No, what happened was Ease had kind of he wanted to concentrate on school. I was the bad influence and was like, let's paint, let's paint, let's paint, just because I had somebody to paint with. So he and I started painting again. Shy had kind of, from what I understand, kind of quit, and we got him all motivated to start painting again. And then Ease moved back to Miami, and we took a couple of road trips before Inkheads, with Edic and all that. We'd go up to the Bronx and paint and whatever. Um, and then, yeah, it ended up like I
Because
was
Edic
down in Miami.
split time living between Miami and the Bronx, is that right?
Yeah, from what I
Yeah.
understand, Edic is the most secretive dude on the planet. So he might live here for all I know, you know.
Okay.
But he, yeah, he's I think from what I understand, he's somewhere Miami and the Bronx. I just found out the other day that Shy lives here in Colorado in Denver. Um, and I was
Oh,
like,
okay.
that's weird, you know, like, dude, we were in the same cruise for a million years, and I had no idea he lives here. But yeah, but yeah, that's kind of where that the whole like Inkheads thing came, was, dude, we were all painting together as you know, under FA, and then these guys were like, "Yo, we're gonna do a new thing, Inkheads," and I was like, "I'm on board," you know. So
Mhm.
Alan, you know, Raven was part of that as well, and it was,
Yeah, I remember late 90s, early 2000s when they were stirring stuff up in New York a fair amount. I mean, they were
yeah.
bombing their own names and they were stickering the hell out of Inkhead stickers.
Were they?
Yeah.
That was probably Rage mostly. That
Okay.
dude is, he really, he's so damn prolific at the bombing thing. Like when he gets it, if he gets it in his head, that dude's going all city, you know?
Yeah, it was like the caveman graphic
Yeah,
stickers
that
I
was
remember
him.
everywhere. Yeah.
Oh man. But yeah, he's uh and Ray, it's funny, everybody like Inkheads was basically like FA plus Edic. You know what I mean?
Okay.
Like and then Dash and A Bomb were part of it as well. Like uh, to me that was such a like a game changer for Miami, because everybody in Miami was just kind of stuck in their, like rooted in their crews that they had been in since day one. And this was the first time that we like took kind of pieces from a bunch of other crews and put them together, and did something really damn cool, you know.
Mm.
It's still recognized by like that's the thing that people tell me, oh man, Inkheads, and I'm like, yeah. Like, oh, I remember that dude from the 12-ounce days or whatever. So
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's something I want to talk to you about too, because I went back and I was watching on your Instagram that clip of you and Raven in '93. You guys were teenagers, right? And it was 93. Am I remembering that right?
I think so, yeah.
So 12 ounce started slightly after that, within like 5 years or something like that, right? I don't know when his first zine came out. It was like
Yeah.
97, 98, something like that.
No, no, it was way earlier than that. It
Oh,
was
it was okay.
we were almost done with it by the end of the 90s, and there was 7 issues, and they came out like, I don't know, not I'd say probably biannually, you know.
Yeah.
Um
I don't even have any of them. I think I got the Vapors zine when he did the Vapors one.
I've got them all still, and
Yeah.
it's funny because Alan the other day we were talking. I sent him a picture of all of them laid out. He was like, "I don't even have them all," and I was like, ah. I was like, "Let me know. I'll sell you some just to
That's
mess with
right.
him."
So
I've been messing with him about like I've honestly hounded him about I want to do like a coffee table book with all the 12-ounce,
yeah,
but have some behind the scenes interviews, like people that were featured, people that, you know, and do
right.
like one bound copy of all of them, like the whole archive. Because, dude, I think that that would be great. Like people love that magazine,
For
you know.
sure. I mean,
And he
that's
keeps
what I
telling
wanted
me,
to say is that before social media, I mean, the website, Alan's, he's been at such the pinpoint of some of these things because he's got such an interest in the technology side of it, and he's been there
yep,
like just before the rest of the culture kind of catches up to it.
it's called
But
Asperger's, in case you're wondering.
your words, not mine.
Yeah,
um, but I mean, as you guys as a crew of people, and obviously he's obsessive when it comes to kind of the behind the scenes aspects on that. But it's all of you guys kind of like at that cultural moment. I feel like this book in a lot of ways, I felt like I was racing against the clock with Flip the Script to kind of like get these individual cultures kind of like locked down and understood before they start to blend together into one. And I guess I wanted to ask you, like, was there ever a sense that you felt that started to happen in a certain period of time? I know you were interested in the local stuff when you started to travel, and that learning curve. It seems like you were ahead of the curve on that because a lot of writers weren't traveling in the early
right.
'90s. And maybe like the touring thing, like hardcore bands touring, and you traveling for shows. Maybe that had something to do with it.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
So
think, you know, it's funny because I do think that, dude, I always felt with 12 ounce in particular, like Alan and I would have these like debates about. I was like, dude, we're doing everything that I'm against. You know what I mean? Like we're ruining, like, dude, these like, dude, we're giving guys like, instead of you having to earn to know what like Philly style's about by traveling and risking your life and going to sketchy situations and really experiencing things, like, dude, we're just handing it to people. And I'm like,
right.
I was always really afraid that that the regional, like the regional flavors that each city had were gonna get lost, you know. And they have been to an extent, like, you know,
Yeah.
or completely, not to an extent, like it's you look at social media, and there's kids that, dude, they paint exactly like somebody from another city that they don't even know. Like, dude, the style's been bitten and bitten and bitten and bitten and flipped so many times from that person that they don't even know where the root of what they're doing is, you know?
Right.
And
Right.
whereas like Philly dudes could probably point back to where they're, and I know I keep bringing up Philly, but to me, there's still the one regional,
Yeah.
like the one region or the one city that has really kept their identity and kept their their style and like protected it, you know?
Yeah. There's a stubbornness to it that's admirable on a large
Yeah.
cultural level. Even like the other one that really comes to mind is like that Southern California Cholo Mexican American style. For us who grew up skateboarding, like by the time the '80s came about, and you had Rat Bones and Pal Peralta logos and all that, you know, the graphic work of that spread it out to like the culture as a whole. And now from like I don't know when those things I know I did for the book research, like when those started to come out, but like from the mid 80s, say, to today, that's become just kind of like a ubiquitous style. Maybe less so in recent years in skateboarding graphics, but like for the Gen X crowd, that was like what skateboarding looked like.
Yep.
Um, and I
Yeah,
think
and they
that,
have kept.
yeah, but also it's blended, right? Like by the time New York style piecing got out there, you have all those awesome stuff like all the MSK guys and the AWR guys were doing. That feels like a real blend of those two things. It's like they
Yep.
kept a very, very California and kind of, the Cholo influence that was on there, and then they kind of like brought in the New York piecing stuff, and there were plenty of people before that, I'm sure, but like it really started to kind of become its own new thing in that period.
Yep.
And it's just really weird to be in a media place in history where we can see that happening within our lifetimes, and you can remember the things that get lost and see the things that are emerging. And
Right.
I mean, I feel a little bit of that responsibility even with doing this book. Like you're saying, it's like, are we making it too easy? Like, there were plenty of people that when I was talking to people for this book, some of the older school writers who were just like, no, I'm going to pass. Like, it took me a long time to develop that. That's my secret that I want to keep.
Right. And I get that. Dude, I absolutely get that. I think one of the biggest things that it, one of the things that eroded the culture has been that the idea of mentors kind of went by the wayside, because now you could just research anything you want. Instead of being like, yo, man, how do you do that? Now, to a guy that's in your crew or whatever that's going to pass something down to you, now you just like scroll through until you see something you like, and take a picture of it and trace it in Procreate 40 times until you kind of figure out how to do it. And it's sad. I'm a big fan of the mentorship aspect of it. I feel like I brought a lot of dudes up that I met through the years. Like I would meet kids that had an interest in graffiti and start painting with them and kind of do outlines for them and teach them and kind of teach them the same way that I was taught. And unfortunately, that seems to be gone. And it's I always feel like a grumpy old man, like I said yesterday in a text message. Like I'm like, oh, back in my day, but really, things have changed. I can't say that it's like any. I can't say it's any worse. Maybe it's better. Who knows? But I will tell you, as far as those MSK AWR guys, to me the most impressive thing is that those dudes all they pretty much took like every like a convention or rule that we kind of like graffiti guys tended to, we're knuckleheads when it comes to that. Like, oh, this needs to this, an arrow can't come out of nowhere, and we have all these like unwritten rules, and these dudes just threw them all out and said, I'm just gonna make really cool shit, and they, to me, it's amazing. Like, I've seen Revoke, for example, from the early days in Tennessee to the days in Atlanta to when I saw pieces of his, I think in Jacksonville. Like the dude's been around, and he started with a very traditional style, and you could see like the influences, and then dude, now the stuff he does is ridiculous. Not only the spirograph looking things, but his actual pieces are, dude, it's so like deconstructive, and so like they really have as a crew like that, and I've heard people like try to talk smack about them. Oh yeah, they do this and that. And I'm like, dude, they've pushed the envelope so, like
turned it inside
Rhymes'
out. Yeah.
crazy little arrows that he was doing. Those like little, dude, I see them everywhere now. And the first time I saw Rhymes' arrow, I was like, dude, that is a crazy looking ass arrow, And then I've seen it 7,000 times since then,
In other people's stuff, you're saying?
Yeah, in other people's
Yeah,
stuff, and it's like, dude, people don't realize the influence those guys have had on everybody. Like all the just highlights, the way they do their highlights, and they would just kind of flare out into nothingness. Outside of the piece, outside of the letters, into the background. Before, somebody would have been like, "Yo, that's sloppy, dog," and now it's like, no, that shit looks rad, and you see it with dudes. There was a kid here that I think he's from Cincinnati that was doing some stuff that I was like, oh, dude, that's straight MSK stuff. Like I absolutely recognize it as MSK stuff, but more power to him, I guess.
And you know what? That's kind of what's interesting in the tension of a lot of this project for me is like how much of innovation in an art form is individual contribution versus kind of the culture that we take on. So we were just talking about like the Cholo thing or the Philly thing. It would be really, really hard to be, the innovator or something like that in those cultures that are much more like regulated in a lot of ways, or the
Yep.
styles are a lot more regulated. Um, it's like slang terms. When you heard, slang terms for the first time, I'm shows me how old I am when I'll use this example from hip hop, but like word is bond, which like has disappeared from the lexicon, right? Like someone would sound like, okay, Gramps, like, throwing that around, unless
Yeah.
they're like that dude who's like, you don't check that guy's card because he's that guy. But like
Right.
every one of us who grew up in that era were saying things like that
Yeah.
when it was a thing, and then it kind of like disappears, and the fashion changes, and
Yep.
new stuff comes around. And I think what's so weird about now is like, and I'll just stick with hip hop for a second. There was a point in time in like the late 80s, early 90s where it had grown out of the stereotype of what you expected hip hop to be like really uniquely its own thing. And like you were hearing these examples, you were hearing like jazz in New York stuff, and you were hearing funk in West Coast stuff, and you were
Yep.
like, oh, that that kind of like defined the flavors of where those things came from. And now that like you can't sample because of legal stuff and things like that, it all kind of like starts to sound like something else now, or maybe it doesn't. Maybe I'm just out of there. Maybe it's all influenced by Atlanta and Dirty South stuff now, since I've been out of the hip hop thing for a while. But like those trends that change that kind of come from somewhere, oftentimes we get um, preoccupied with who was the first, who was the innovator, who was the one person, and you're kind of like, yo, Elvis didn't invent it. He was just the bridge that brought it to the
Right.
mass audience.
Well,
And that's kind of what's interesting to me in this project is like you said, it's like it's all paying dues and like in expressing like gratitude to saying, hey, that dude was super influential. The people who are doing it, you should know where that influence comes from.
right.
But it's like the demo tapes that you and I would trade with hardcore. It's like, I don't know, I got this tape from this band from wherever, and it's a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy.
Yep. Yeah, and but the sound, like what you were saying with that with sound, it's like there it used to be, and I mean, still, I think hip hop has uh, I still think that there is a like a West Coast sound versus like a New York sound. It's funny because the New York sound now people just say, "Oh, that just sounds old." Like it
Right.
just sounds like
Yeah.
old hip hop.
Right.
Whereas, you know, like I always loved that about in that genre. What was like New Orleans stuff. Like anytime that you hear like or when you would hear the DC stuff, or these cities that really had distinct,
The
even Miami
go-go
with our
thing.
Miami bass stuff. Yeah, the
Right.
go-go thing, and I can't remember what they call the New Orleans stuff, but it really has a lot of like horns and a lot of weird,
Mhm.
influences and instruments in there that you don't hear out of New York, or you don't hear, you know. But I love that. I loved the fact that you could like listen to some group and be like, I have a pretty good idea where these dudes are from.
Yeah.
Atlanta really has ruined it for everybody with that
I
yuck
don't
metal,
blame Atlanta as
mumble
much as I
rap.
blame. Yeah, I just blame I honestly, I think a lot of it's just this is a different conversation for another time, but like I'm conflicted on how we look at, let's put it to one way. It's like if you think of like the growth of a teenager, you're as a baby, you're connected to your parent. You learn how to walk, and you like start to become more independent. By the time you're a teenager, you're developing your psychological individual personhood. But when you leave your family, then you're trying to kind of figure out where you participate and what culture defines you, or what group of friends defines you. So you're stuck in between this space of like individuation, finding yourself compared to or against a group, and then participation, how you define yourself in that group. And I don't think it's one or the other. I think it's both, right? Like, so the individuation is like, hey, that person was the first person to do that letter E or that arrow or whatever it
Right,
is. But then it's the participation of like, if it's too weird, everybody rejects it. Like
right,
you can't really do that thing that's so weird. And then you end up with this idea of ownership and from the early stages of any culture, there isn't really a sense of ownership because there isn't really a sense of whether this thing is worth anything other than the camaraderie or the relationship that you have with other people. Once that gets commodified, now with hip hop, for instance, it's like sampling, there's no more sampling. So
Right.
the production of beats and stuff like that, it kind of like drives all the sound into a space that's like pretty compressed because in the early days of hip hop, you didn't have to be an amazing bassist to hear an amazing bass line and pick it up and put it in a
Right.
record. So like it gave you this creativity of the thief who was able to like, steal and borrow and beg to pull these things apart. And graffiti, I think, is very much like that. It's like, you know, when credit's the only thing that matters, it was okay. But now that there's like money at stake and stuff like that, it's a little bit harder. And I
Yeah.
don't know, for good or bad. I mean, it's pretty rad that people can make a living doing this, and I don't make a living doing these books, but it's enough that I don't give up on.
Right. Right. They're passion projects at the end of
Yeah,
the day.
exactly.
It's funny because I worked in the motocross industry for over 20 years, and I still have a team that in theory is mine. This kid named Chase Cunningham runs it and does a fantastic job. But dude, it's something that doesn't make us, dude, it's never made us any money. Like
Right.
anytime that we did land a big sponsor, it was like, ooh, we've got money to do more stuff for the team. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like we
Yeah,
never
exactly.
pocketed a dime from it. And I get it. It's like, dude, I could never give up on it. Or I mean, at some point, I kind of almost have given up on it in the sense that I've got this new dude that's running everything, and I'm hoping that he finds the next version of himself to pass it on to, and we keep this thing going, like have a legacy there. But you have to be cut from a certain cloth to not always be trying to monetize like your passions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I get it. Like I've done it with a million different things where I'm like, man, I want to do this, and it sounds like a great idea, and I'm going to put this out or I'm going to do this. And at the end of the day, if it doesn't make money, I'm like, man, I had a hell of a time doing it. Just the
Yeah.
connections that I made or the relationships that I made were worth it.
I feel like there's this sweet spot, both as individuals, but as a culture, where like you can make enough on something that it generates enough energy to keep doing it over and over and over again. But like once you make too much, the art form starts to go
Yeah.
down a little bit.
Yeah. It's funny because I'm painting for a living now, which I had never done. And it was a reluctant thing. It was like after I got divorced, I was like, oh man, what am I gonna do? The motocross travel schedule doesn't work as a single parent, like where it's like, dude, when I knew that my kids had a home with their mom and they were all hanging out, blah blah blah. But when it's like, oh wait, no, this is my time with them. Now that you've got limited time with them, how am I gonna like? I don't want to go raise somebody else's kids instead of mine. So.
Mm.
I was stuck here trying to figure out what I was going to do, and I was like, "Oh, I'm going to do something in mountain biking, or I'm going to do this, or I'm going to do that." And I kind of like bounced around a little bit, and then a buddy of mine was like, "Hey, man, do you still do graffiti? You want to paint my place?" And dude, that kind of snowballed into this whole thing where now I'm painting for a living, and it's rad. It's like, dude, it pays just that I'm not getting rich. I'm not. A lot of times I'm painting an agency comes up with something that I just have to, I'm like a human printer. But
Mm-hmm.
dude, at the end of the day, man, it's like there's no ego in it. I'm paying my bills, I'm getting to do something. I feel like all those little jobs sharpen my skills for when I'm painting for fun.
Yeah.
And I outside of this year where I broke my heel or whatever at Basel, I haven't painted this year, but normally I'm trying to get like 50 to 100 pieces in every year. So I'm still like, pretty active for a 51-year-old or almost 51-year-old.
And living the dream of your 16-year-old self.
Yeah, yeah. And it's funny, dude, I've got 3 teenagers as well. I've got twins that are 15 and one that's about to be 13 in like a month and a half. And dude, you would think like, that I would want to like what you were saying, like, oh man, you want to pass on your stuff, like. Dude, my kids, I've tried to get them to listen to hardcore. They don't, it's just not for them. Once in a while, like I've gotten my son to listen to old school hip hop. Like he listens to a lot of the new stuff, but it's a really cool, dude, it's given us a really cool space where he turns me on to new stuff and I turn him on to old stuff. And it's kind of cool to like share our interests or tastes like that. But my kids are all athletes, and I love it. Like I'm like, dude, would I love to have three? Like, I don't know if you've seen like Totem's kids, dude. They're like 12 and I don't know. I think 12 and 14. Those little fuckers burn like nice pieces. Like, dude, they can battle a lot of people and win. And I'm like, dude, what a phenomenal job of parenting to bring your kids into what you're into. Like they've been breakdancing, and well, my kids just didn't have it in them. Like they just zero interest for dad's world. You know, they
Yeah.
think it's cool. I'll do a piece and I'll send it to them, and then they'll be like, yeah, or, you know, or show it to them, and then like 2 days later, I'll get a text like, hey, Dad, can you send me that wall that you just painted? Why? Oh, I want to show it to my friends, and I'm like, okay, that's good enough for me, you know.
Right. Yeah, that's awesome.
So yeah, dude. But I don't know. The way you put the music thing really does make sense with the creativity. I mean, the freedom to sample so much back in the day versus now, and I guess I had never thought of that. That's a really good like good parallel, you know?
Yeah, I think there's something fascinating about. I think what you're saying is the flip side of that, though. It's like if you can sample from something and know what you're sampling from, all the better. If like,
Yeah,
it's kind of like, in the mid '90s or whatever, when hip hop was like sampling other hip hop tracks, and it's like, you hear whatever Flavor Flav's voice in another group's thing or whatever.
right,
It's like because they're actually in the background trying to get that funky drummer beat or something like that.
right,
It's
right.
like, yeah,
Yeah, but dude, I love, dude, I wouldn't trade the era that I grew up in for the world. Like I love the fact that I was born in New York, and it's funny because I lived there till elementary school, and then we moved to Miami, and you don't realize like how, dude, like everything I'm into is like New York. It's like hip hop and New York hardcore, and you know what I mean. Like a lot of the stuff that like really I've like built my life around is very New York centric. Without I never realized it till like recently. I was like, wow, like I really am a damn New Yorker at heart. Graffiti, graffiti, hip hop, New York hardcore, um, everything that I loved. Like if I had to list all my stuff, you could almost trace all of them back to New York City, and I'm like, well, it's kind of kind of cool. I wonder, my kids were raised in Atlanta and Colorado. I wonder what they're
Mhm.
going to identify with mumble rap and weed, or I don't know, mumble rap and hippiness. No, but I love that like your environment can like seep into your DNA so much, and make you do things that you don't realize, like like you're soaking all this stuff up even at a young age without knowing it. So I would imagine through your formative years of graffiti, it's the same thing. Whatever
Mhm.
whatever city you're in, dude, you're always gonna have a root of that city in your style.
Mhm.
Like there's people that will look at my stuff now and go, "Oh, dude, that looks Miami as hell," and I'm like, I don't see it Miami as hell. Like
Yeah.
but I guess there's something there. There's always going to be that little like Miami flavor in things.
Yeah, so sometimes you need to have that community to help you see the thing that you take for granted.
Yeah,
I mean, I tell kids this all the time. It's like the thing that you think is a mistake in the beginning, we'll do it 10,000 times. Eventually, you'll turn that into your personal style. You'll,
yep.
it's like, there's things I hate in my handwriting, like certain letters that are just like, man, I just don't like those letters.
Well, you remember when we were coming up with the phrase
Yeah.
for battle? Um, I was like, dude, things that like a V with an I with an like. There's all these letters that to me, no matter what style I'm trying to write it in, dude, I just can't get it right. Like, dude, an N in the middle of a letter will just ruin my whole day. I mean, in the middle of a word, because
Yeah.
I'm like, I don't know where to go from here. And then I
Right.
was watching these kids. Dude, there's really some good hand style guys out there now. Like just from the sampling that I saw through the battle, like dude, it
Yeah.
was eye opening to me. I was like, wow, dude, there's some really good dudes that I've never even heard of that can crush hand styles.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. This was a really good battle. I think the quality on this one was really pretty top notch.
Well, what I want to do is I'm going to get those kids to all write my name so I can figure out how to write it better. I haven't figured it out in all these years. Maybe one of them can give me a hand because holy crap, those kids were good, man. You
Yeah.
know?
Well, thanks so much for being a part of this, Dekae. I really appreciate you. I appreciate your willingness to share with me through the years and to be a part
Oh,
of this.
dude,
It
no
was fun.
problem. No,
Yeah.
no, man. Thanks for having me. And dude, we need to go see a show or do something at some point. Do you still go
Yeah,
to any horror shows or anything?
I do. My oldest son started getting into hardcore, so I use him as an excuse to go to stuff. I got to
That's
hard
rad.
yeah. So I got some friends here, a bunch of the older 40s and 50s guys. I'll you know, I occasionally will get prodded into tripping around and doing my half song mosh, and then I'm kind of like catching my breath,
I'm now the old guy that stands in the back and just occasionally puts a hand out just to keep
Yeah,
kids
yeah,
from bumping into me. And I'm like, yeah, that's enough for me. That's enough contact. I
right.
was at a show here at Sick of It All was here, and I've known those dudes for a million years. And the two dudes were like, it was about to turn into some kind of fight, and I was like, kind of right on the edge of it, like waiting to see which way it was gonna go. And I hear Craig go, George, you're too old for this shit, George. Get on the stage. I was like, oh, so I'm like, Craig ahead just called me up on the stage because I'm too old to be in that. And I was like, I wasn't going to be involved. I was just trying to make sure that, like, I didn't want to see
Sure.
some poor kid get stomped to death.
Yeah.
But being from our era, like, I'm not scared of a fight. Like, I'm like, whatever, dude. If it's going to happen, I just want to make sure this one kid's not getting jumped by all these kids, And,
Right on.
but yeah, we'll have to go to a show one day.
Sounds good, man.
Thanks so much for everything, and let me know if I can help you with anything, dude. I'm always down.
Thanks, George. Talk to you
All right,
soon.
man. Bye.
Flipping the script.